My name is Sophia Miller. I'm 24 years old, and the night my own family decided to label me a failure is still burned into my memory like it happened yesterday. It wasn't just a word. It was a knife, twisting quietly but deeply into every corner of my chest. We were sitting in the living room that Friday evening, the same house I had grown up in, the same walls that had once felt safe but had long since turned cold. Mom, Linda Miller, sat across from me with her hands folded, her eyes sharper than usual, and Dad, Richard Miller, paced near the window, shaking his head. My older brother, Daniel, leaned back with his arms crossed, while my younger sister, Chloe, scrolled on her phone, only looking up when something cruel needed to be said. "Look at you, Sophia," Dad muttered, his voice low but heavy with disappointment. "You're 24. No degree, no stable job, nothing to your name. You're wasting your life away." Daniel chuckled, that dry, mocking laugh he always used when he wanted to make sure I felt small. "Honestly, Dad's right. You're just drifting. People my age are buying houses, building careers. And you can't even keep one job for more than a year." Chloe finally put her phone down, smirking. Maybe if Sophia spent less time daydreaming and more time working, she wouldn't be such a disaster. Mom didn't laugh. She didn't smirk. But her silence was louder than both of them combined. She just looked at me, the way people look at someone who has failed to meet even the lowest expectations. And then she said it, the sentence that broke something inside me forever. "You're a failure, Sophia. That's what you are. And we're tired of pretending otherwise." The words didn't just sting, they shattered me. My throat tightened, my vision blurred, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. Failure. That was the label stamped across my forehead, not just by strangers, not by society, but by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I wanted to defend myself, to scream that they didn't understand, that I wasn't lazy or useless. But the truth? I didn't have anything concrete to show them. No diploma, no career path neatly lined up. Just a string of part-time jobs, side hustles, and late nights where I clung to the hope that something better was just around the corner. So instead of fighting back, I swallowed the tears burning my throat and forced a small, bitter smile. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," I whispered, though my voice cracked halfway through. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Don't act like the victim, Sophia. We're just being honest. Someone had to say it." Chloe leaned forward, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "You know, some people just aren't meant to succeed. Maybe that's you. And that's okay, as long as you accept it." The room spun. Their voices echoed in my head, bouncing around like poison I couldn't spit out. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, my palms damp against the fabric of my jeans. I excused myself and rushed to my room, slamming the door shut before the tears finally spilled. I collapsed onto the bed, clutching the pillow so tightly my knuckles turned white. In the darkness of that room, I let myself cry, not the soft, quiet kind of crying, but the ugly, shaking, uncontrollable sobs that come when your spirit feels broken. But somewhere between the sobs and the silence that followed, something stirred inside me. A small ember, faint but alive. Their words hurt, yes, but they also lit something, a defiance I didn't even know I carried. I thought back to the little notebook I kept hidden in my drawer. Pages filled with ideas, research, late-night calculations. I wasn't aimless. I wasn't drifting. I was working on something none of them knew about. Something that could change everything. But that night, as I lay there replaying every cruel word, I made myself a promise. One day, they'll regret calling me a failure. One day, they'll see who I really am. The house outside my room buzzed with laughter again, like nothing had happened. My family had dismissed me, shoved me into a box labeled useless, and moved on. But I stayed awake until morning, staring at the ceiling, clutching my notebook, and vowing that I would rewrite the ending of my story, even if it took everything I had left. That night wasn't just the night they called me a failure. It was the night I quietly decided they'd never get the last word. After that night, when my own family branded me a failure, I realized I had two choices: either crumble under their words or quietly build something they'd never see coming. And the truth? I didn't even argue with them, because my best weapon was silence. By day, I looked like exactly what they accused me of being: a girl with no steady job, a 24-year-old drifting between shifts at a local bookstore, babysitting for neighbors, and doing small delivery gigs. But what they didn't know was that every paycheck, every crumpled tip stuffed in my pocket, every dollar scraped together, it was all part of something bigger. I had been saving since I was 19. Not in a flashy way, not in a way anyone would notice. I skipped coffee runs, wore second-hand clothes, and took buses instead of driving, even when it meant walking through the rain with groceries cutting into my arms. Every sacrifice became fuel for my secret. The secret was this: I had invested. It started small. Late nights on my old, hammer-down laptop, watching videos about finance, reading articles about real estate, learning terms I had never heard before. Words like equity, mortgage notes, rental yield, they became my secret vocabulary. Nobody in my family knew. They thought I was scrolling social media when, in reality, I was running spreadsheets, studying neighborhoods, and bookmarking every bank auction listing I could find. One night, while everyone else was asleep, I came across a listing for a small duplex on the east side of town. The price was low, almost suspiciously low, because the property needed work. But to me, it wasn't an eyesore, it was an opportunity. I didn't have enough to buy it outright, but I had saved enough for the down payment. So I did it. Quietly, nervously, with my heart hammering against my ribs, I signed papers that would change my life. I became a property owner. But here's the thing, I didn't tell a soul. Not Mom, not Dad, not Daniel or Chloe. To them, I was still the girl sleeping in the smallest bedroom of the house, eating leftovers, and begging for rides when my old car broke down. They had no idea that, while they mocked me, I was meeting with contractors, learning about plumbing codes, and negotiating rent with tenants who would one day move into my duplex. There were moments when I almost slipped. Like the Saturday morning when Chloe barged into my room and saw me reviewing a lease agreement. I snapped the notebook shut so fast I thought my fingers might break. "What are you hiding?" she smirked. I forced a laugh. "Just writing." She rolled her eyes, muttering something about me wasting time, and left. The night Daniel found me scribbling numbers on a napkin at dinner. "Still playing make-believe with your fake businesses," he joked, snatching it away before I could protest. He laughed at the columns of expenses, shaking his head. "Sophia, you're ridiculous." He tossed it into the trash. I said nothing. I let him laugh. But inside, I smiled, because I knew what he didn't. Every insult became fuel. Every dismissal pushed me harder. While they watched TV, I was repainting walls in my duplex. While they called me lazy, I was learning how to unclog drains and patch drywall from YouTube tutorials. I wasn't just an investor. I was building something with my own two hands. And then came the first rent check. I'll never forget the way it felt to hold that envelope, to see actual money, not from a job, not from clocking in and out, but from an asset that was mine. It wasn't much, not at first, but it was proof. Proof that I wasn't a failure. Proof that I could create something real. I wanted to scream it from the rooftops. I wanted to slam that rent check on the kitchen table and say, Look at what I did while you called me useless. But I didn't. Because I wasn't ready. Because my silence was my shield, and patience was my weapon. Instead, I tucked the check into my savings account and went back to dinner like nothing happened. Dad complained about bills. Daniel bragged about his promotion, and Chloe showed off a new outfit she bought online. They didn't even notice me. And maybe that was the best part, because while they ignored me, I was slowly, steadily building leverage. Within a year, I reinvested. Another small property, then another. Nothing glamorous, nothing big enough to draw attention. Just quiet steps, one after the other, until I had something nobody could take away. But here's what I didn't see coming. My family situation was starting to crack. Dad's hours got cut at work. Mom was stressed about medical bills. Daniel, despite his bragging, was drowning in credit card debt. Chloe's spending habits were catching up to her. And me? The girl they had dismissed, the failure they had written off? I was quietly becoming the one with the power. Every time they mocked me, every time they called me useless, I smiled a little inside. Because I knew, one day, they would find out the truth. And when that day came, everything would change. I'll never forget the night it all began to unravel. It was late November, cold enough that frost glazed the windows and the air stung every time you stepped outside. We were gathered in the living room, the TV humming in the background while Dad flipped through bills with a scowl that deepened every second. Mom hovered behind him, wringing her hands like she always did when money talk came up. Another late fee. Dad muttered, tossing the envelope onto the coffee table. His jaw clenched. They are bleeding us dry. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed, pretending he wasn't listening, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the pile of papers. Chloe sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling on her phone, pretending she didn't care. But I saw her swallow hard when Dad mentioned the credit cards. It was the first time I realized they weren't invincible. All those years of mocking me, of calling me a failure, they had painted themselves as the successful ones, the ones who had it all together. But here they were, arguing over overdue bills, trying to figure out which one to pay first. Maybe if someone in this house actually pulled their weight. Dad started, his eyes sliding toward me. Heat shot up my neck. I do, I whispered. He barked out a laugh. Babysitting and part-time shifts at a bookstore? That's not pulling weight, Sophia. That's playing pretend. Daniel snickered. Don't take it personally, sis. You've always been lightweight. My fists curled in my lap. I wanted to scream. I own more than you'll ever dream of owning. But I stayed silent. Silence was still my weapon. Only this time, silence wasn't enough. Because 2 weeks later, everything collapsed. Dad came home one night, shoulders sagging, his white badge still clipped crookedly to his shirt. He didn't even make it to the couch before he said it. They are cutting my hours again. His voice cracked on the last word. Mom gasped. Daniel cursed under his breath. Chloe finally looked up from her phone. And I just sat there, staring at them. For the first time in years, they didn't look like the strong, untouchable people who had dismissed me. They looked small, fragile, afraid. Bills piled higher. Calls from creditors became constant. Mom started whispering with relatives on the phone, asking for help. Daniel sold his car to cover a loan, but even that wasn't enough. Chloe begged Dad for tuition money, and he snapped at her until she ran to her room in tears. And through it all, not once did they ask me for help. Why would they? In their eyes, I was still the failure, the girl who couldn't stand on her own 2 feet. But then came the night that changed everything. It was Christmas Eve. We weren't celebrating. Not really. The tree stood in the corner, half lit because one strand of lights had burned out. The table was set with spaghetti instead of turkey because Mom said it was cheaper. Dad was unusually quiet, staring at the floor. Then the knock came. A man in a dark jacket stood at the door, a folder in his hand. Dad's face drained as he opened it. The words foreclosure notice hung in the air like a death sentence. Mom gasped. Daniel cursed again. Chloe clutched her chest like she couldn't breathe. And me? My heart pounded, but not from fear. From realization. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. Because the property in that notice, the one they were about to lose, I owned the mortgage. They didn't know it, of course. They had no idea that, months earlier, when the debt had been sold off, I had quietly purchased it through the same channels I'd been using for years. To them, it was some faceless company tightening the noose. To me, it was proof that the tables had turned. Dad sank into his chair, his hands trembling. "We're going to lose the house," he whispered. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, sounded small. Mom started crying. Chloe rushed to comfort her. Daniel slammed his fist against the wall, muttering about how unfair life was. And I just sat there, staring at the notice in Dad's hands. The urge to reveal everything nearly broke me. I wanted to stand up, to shout, "This is mine. I hold the deed. The girl you called a failure is the one who owns the roof over your head." But I didn't. Not yet. Because power isn't just about owning something. It's about choosing the right moment to reveal it. So I stayed quiet, watching as the family that once mocked me now crumbled under the weight of their own mistakes. Watching as the balance of power shifted in a way they couldn't yet understand. That night, as they argued and cried and blamed one another, I slipped away to my room. I pulled out my folder, the one where I kept every deed, every payment record, every signed lease. And I stared at the paper that proved what I already knew. The house they were about to lose already belonged to me. For years, I had been the invisible one, the quiet one, the failure. But now I was the one holding all the cards. And soon, very soon, they were going to find out. The air in our house grew heavier with every passing day. Bills stacked up on the counter, unopened envelopes collecting dust like silent reminders of a storm no one wanted to face. Dad stopped sitting at the dinner table, preferring instead to pace the living room with a beer in his hand. Mom avoided eye contact, always busy with something, anything, that didn't require her to talk about money. Daniel disappeared for hours at a time, coming back bitter and restless. Chloe cried at night, though she tried to hide it. And me? I waited. For weeks, I carried the truth inside me like a flame I wasn't ready to set free. I watched them break apart piece by piece, the same way they had once broken me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, they told me I would never make it, that I was dead weight. Now, I held the very papers that could decide whether they stayed under this roof or were tossed onto the street. But waiting has its limit. And mine came one icy January night. We were sitting in the living room again, the foreclosure notice still taped to the fridge like a scar they couldn't look away from. Dad had just finished yelling at Mom for overspending on groceries when Daniel snapped. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, slamming his hand on the coffee table. "We can't live like this. Somebody has to do something." Dad glared at him. "And what exactly do you suggest, Daniel? You got a magic solution tucked in your pocket?" The room went silent. I could feel my pulse in my ears. This was it. My moment. I set my mug down, stood up slowly, and looked at each of them. "I do," I said quietly. For heads turned toward me. Dad scoffed. "What are you talking about, Sophia? Don't start with your nonsense right now." Mom shook her head. "Sweetheart, please, not now." But I didn't back down. I reached into the folder I'd hidden under the couch cushion and pulled out a single sheet of paper. My hands didn't even tremble as I placed it on the coffee table. Daniel frowned, leaning over. "What's this?" "Read it," I said. He picked it up, scanning the page. His brows knitted together, his lips parting as he realized what it was. This is a deed." Dad snatched it from him, his eyes darting across the lines. Then he froze. His face went pale. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Finally, Mom whispered, "Sophia, why does your name say owner?" I took a deep breath. "Because I own this house. I've owned it since the mortgage was sold 6 months ago." The words landed like a thunderclap. Chloe gasped, covering her mouth. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. Dad stood up so fast his chair toppled over. "You're lying," he barked. "This is some kind of trick." "It's not a trick," I said, my voice steady. "Every late payment you made, every overdue notice, you were paying me. Not some bank, not some company. Me." Mom staggered back, her hand gripping the edge of the couch. But how? You don't have money like that. You don't. I worked. I cut her off. I saved. I invested when no one thought I could. While you laughed at me, while you told me I'd never make it, I was building something. And when this house went up for grabs, I bought it. Quietly. Legally. It's mine. The room erupted. Daniel shouted, "You've been sitting on this while we've been drowning." Dad's face turned red. "You smug little—" He stopped himself, his fists clenching. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "You let us suffer, Sophia. You let us think we were going to lose everything." I looked at her, my chest tightening. And when I was suffering, when I was begging for help, for a kind word, for just one of you to believe in me, you laughed. You turned your backs. You told me I wasn't good enough. Do you remember that? No one spoke. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. For the first time, I wasn't the invisible one. For the first time, every eye in the room was on me, not in mockery, but in shock. Dad finally sat back down, his voice low but shaking. "So, what happens now?" I stared at him, at all of them. I could feel the weight of years of humiliation pressing against my ribs, demanding release. This was the moment I'd imagined over and over, the moment where I was no longer powerless. "I haven't decided," I said softly. "Maybe I let you stay. Maybe I don't. That's the power I have now." Mom's lip trembled. "Sophia, please, we're family." The word stung. Family, a word they used when it benefited them, but forgot when it came to me. I leaned forward, my voice calm, almost cold. Family doesn't throw each other out. Family doesn't dismiss someone's pain. Family doesn't laugh when one of them is trying to breathe. You did that to me. Every one of you. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I needed them to see me strong, not broken. Chloe whispered, "Sophia, what do you want from us?" I paused, letting the silence stretch, watching their faces twist with fear and uncertainty. Then I said, "Respect. That's all I ever wanted. And now you don't have a choice but to give it to me." The words hung in the air, final and heavy. No one argued. No one mocked me. For the first time in my life, they were silent not because they dismissed me, but because they knew I was right. And in that silence, I felt the shift. The balance of power had moved. The girl they had once treated like nothing had just become the one thing they couldn't live without. The night of my reveal didn't end in fireworks. No screaming match. No plates shattered against the wall. Instead, the silence became the loudest sound in the room. My family sat frozen, like statues in a museum of shame. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking in the corner. I was the center of the room, and every word I spoke hung heavier than anything they could muster. But when the silence broke, it wasn't with anger. It was with desperation. "Please, Sophia," Mom whispered, her hands trembling as she reached toward me. "You can't just take the house away. This is our home. You grew up here." The irony made my chest ache. Yes, I grew up here, listening to them laugh at my dreams, ignoring me when I needed help, dismissing me like I was background noise. Did this place feel like home to me anymore? Dad finally found his voice, low and gravelly. "We made mistakes, but we're still your parents. You wouldn't put your own family out on the street." I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was older than I remembered, lines carved deeper by years of stress and bitterness. But I couldn't forget the night he snapped at me when I was gasping for breath, calling me dramatic instead of helping me. That memory had scarred me more than anything else. Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharp. "If you kick us out, you'll regret it. You'll have no one." That was the moment I realized just how wrong he was. I already had no one. They'd made sure of that years ago. But this time, the decision was mine. I didn't answer them right away. I told them I needed time. Over the next few days, the house felt different. They avoided me, tiptoeing like tenants afraid of their landlord. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was the gravity they orbited around. And I thought about everything. About the little girl I used to be, sitting on the stairs while they celebrated Chloe's achievements and ignored mine. About the teenager who begged them to come see her art show and was told they were too busy. About the young woman who nearly passed out on the floor while her dad called her pathetic. This was my chance to end it all, to cut them off the way they'd cut me off. And part of me wanted that. The part of me that still burned with humiliation, that still replayed every cruel word in my head like an old song I couldn't turn off. But another part of me knew revenge wasn't enough. I didn't just want them to suffer. I wanted them to understand. So I called a meeting. We gathered in the living room again. Same room, same sagging couch, same peeling wallpaper. But the energy had shifted. They sat stiff, like they were waiting for a sentence to be read. I didn't sit. I stood, holding the deed in my hand. "I've made my decision," I began. My voice didn't shake, though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Dad leaned forward, his jaw tight. Mom clutched her hands together like she was praying. Daniel avoided my eyes, while Chloe just stayed at me, her face pale. "You're not losing the house," I said. Relief flooded their faces instantly, too quickly, almost. But I continued, and their relief froze into tension again. Things are going to change. I walked closer to the table, placing the deed down like a verdict. From now on, every bill, every payment, every choice about this house goes through me. You live here because I allow it, not because you deserve it. And if any one of you forgets that, if you treat me the way you used to, if you dismiss me, mock me, or call me a burden again, I won't hesitate to take it all away. The words hung in the air, sharp and unmovable. Dad opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "No, you don't get to argue. You don't get to talk your way out of this. You had years to show me respect, and you chose to tear me down instead. Now you'll learn what it means to depend on the person you thought was worthless." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Sophia, we're sorry." I nodded once. "I don't want apologies. I want actions. Show me I matter, not just when it's convenient, but every single day." That night, for the first time, I slept without fear, without that hollow ache of being unseen. I wasn't the weak one anymore. I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the burden, the embarrassment. I was the one who held the keys, not just to the house, but to the balance of power that had once crushed me. It didn't fix everything. The scars were still there. Trust wasn't magically restored. But the lesson had been planted, and I could see it in their eyes every time they looked at me now. Fear, respect, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something closer to acknowledgement. And me? I realized something even bigger. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself. About proving that no matter how much they tried to bury me, I had built something stronger in the shadows. Months later, when neighbors asked how the family managed to save the house, Dad muttered something about a financial arrangement. Mom said nothing. Daniel stayed quiet. And Chloe, sometimes, would glance at me with a strange look, half guilt, half gratitude. They didn't know the full story. No one did. Only we knew the truth, that the daughter they dismissed, the one they laughed at, had become the backbone of the very home they lived in. And I never let them forget it. The final lesson wasn't just for them. It was for me. I learned that revenge feels sweet, but respect, earned and demanded, feels stronger. That sometimes you don't need to throw people out to win. Sometimes making them live every day knowing they underestimated you is the real victory. I walked through the halls of that house differently after that. Every step echoed not as the outcast they once saw me as, but as the owner, the one they could never break again.